Morning, everybody. I hope y'all can all hear me. We had a little trouble getting the audio set up this morning. I think some of y'all might have been here to hear the audio tests we were doing about 10 minutes ago. Anyway, this is part 3 of the intermediate Inquire training, the final part. We are scheduled from 9 to noon. As I did last time, the first 2 hours are intended to be the actual lecture portion, and then there's some extra time built in for discussion or questions or anything. Since this is the last one we're doing, we're kind of running out the remainder of this manual, so I doubt it'll even take up the 2 hours that we've got scheduled. But I am going to start with a quick review of the first 2 parts. I'm going to run through some of the concepts real quick. So in the first part, we talked about the way data is structured in the database, right? The nature of the tables that data are stored on and how they kind of look like a spreadsheet, if you conceptualize a spreadsheet. And each of the tables consists of records and fields. Records being collection of values in each individual field for a given parcel in a given tax year in a given jurisdiction is generally how our data is stored. And then each of the distinct pieces of data, like the jurisdiction number is a field, the parcel ID number or PARID is a field, etc. I kind of talked about how that relates to the tabs that are in maintain, like the PARDAT table is the parcel tab, the OwnDat table is the owner's tab, etc., and how you can get tooltips from the tabs themselves to find out what the name of the actual table is in the database. I talked about the fact that a parcel, kind of like I hinted at just now, PARDAT is the parcel tab, OwnDat is the owner tab. A parcel, as we think of it, is just a collection of records on different tables. Like an individual parcel will have a values record, a parcel record, an owner's record, a legal record, a land record, and so on and so on. And they're all related to each other because they have the same parcel ID number, they're in the same jurisdiction, they have the same jurisdiction number, they have the same tax year number. So that's how we can distinguish like parcels that might have the same parcel ID in different counties, or the same parcel in the same county in different tax years might have different characteristics, right? So those 3 fields, jur, PARID, and tax year, are the primary like identifying fields that tie records on different tables together to form what we think of as a parcel. And that's those key field concept is what values do you need, what fields do you need to identify a unique record? Because ideally, if you look for a specific value in jur, PARID, and tax year, on most tables, PARDAT and OwnDat and things like that, you should get 1 record back. So the key fields are a measure of uniqueness, right? And then in Inquire specifically, you have the show and comparison options, how you can use the show checkbox to select which data you want returned in your query, and the comparison and values fields to condition on that specific field. And you can do one without doing the other, right? You can select a field to show in your results without conditioning by that field, or vice versa. You can condition by a field without selecting it to show in your results. The concept of grouping data I've kind of talked about continuously as I've been showing these dynamic fields, and how selecting different pieces of data will group data together differently depending on the functions you're trying to execute, right? Which are those dynamic fields. If you're trying to run an average of something or an expression that you've built, then those functions are going to be run on the groups of data that are defined by the fields that you've selected to show in your results, right? I talked about the distinction between deactivating and deleting records. I think most folks should have a pretty good grasp on that. When you deactivate a record, it's still there. All that means from a technical perspective is that its cur field has been set to D. And that tells most of our processes to ignore that record, right? If you deactivate a dwelling record, then its value is no longer included in the appraisal and assessment of the parcel. Even though the record is still there for historical and record keeping purposes, um, it's only going to be, you're only going to find it if you go looking for deactivated stuff. It's going to be excluded from our general processes. I talked about the assessment table a little bit and how, like, why every real property parcel is going to have at least 2 assessment records to account for multi-use parcels, right? So if you have the same parcel where some of it is being assessed at one level and the rest of it is being assessed at another level, those 2 different assessment levels have to be handled on 2 different records, like a commercial record and a residential record, for instance, one at 40% and one at 25%. And then the null record is what we call it. The val class null record is the summation of all of the other assessment records. So that's why we always say, if you're looking at the assessment table in Inquire, you always want to specify val class is null, because otherwise you'll get inaccurate counts, you'll get inaccurate values, because a lot of things will be double or triple counted, right? Then I went on to start talking about the dynamic fields, right? The first one I showed you guys was the average field, and how it will let you calculate the average of a specific field on whatever table you're working with. So that's pretty straightforward. And then how you can, going back to that grouping concept, you can add pieces of data to calculate that average on subsets of your query results, right? So that was part 1. Part 2 was a few more of the dynamic fields. I just spent a lot of time talking about dynamic fields. The second dynamic field I showed you guys was the record count, which, again, like the name implies, gives you a count of the number of records being returned in your query, which may seem kind of superfluous, since you run a query and it gives you a count at the bottom, but the record count specifically is where the data grouping concept comes in handy, because you can add a record count dynamic field to your query, and then it will perform that count on whichever other data you're selecting. So I think what I did, let me see. Yeah, when I was doing this example, I had loaded like the city number. I selected a list of city numbers in my county, and Chester County is the data I've been working with. And then the record count gave me a count for each of the city numbers returned. And then I think I did, I broke it down even further by property type. And I showed how adding more data to your grouped logic, right, doesn't change the actual total number of records. It just breaks it up into constituent groups, which I'll go into more detail on. There's one more dynamic field I'm going to show you guys, and then some other stuff when I'm done reviewing. So, okay, the third dynamic field I showed you guys was the expression field, which is definitely the most complicated, but also the most versatile of the dynamic fields. And it can be really useful, but you have to make sure that it is doing what you're expecting it to do. I used it to show you guys how to build a land to building ratio, and how to, you first have to determine which fields you want to use in your formula, because that's what you're doing with the expression field, is you're building a formula, and then how to plug those fields into the expression builder that it provides you. So you're building a formula based on the values in the fields on the tables that you're querying. And like I said, the example that I showed you guys was how to build a land to building ratio kind of analysis. I've known people to use this to build their own assessment sales ratio. So you could set up that formula in there and use that to build a formula on the fly, and that way it'll use whatever values are out there for appraisal and sale price, instead of whichever ratio is stored on the sales tab at the time the sale is keyed, because I know sometimes there can be some mismatch there. or you can use both of them to see if they reflect each other. You know, you can use that as an analytical tool. So the next two fields I showed you guys are kind of two sides of the same coin: the minimum of and maximum of. And again, I couldn't really think of much practical use for us for these fields. You guys might, just knowing they exist, you guys might have a situation one day where you go, oh, that maximum field would be perfect for what I need to do here. The examples I showed you guys were the minimum of, I think I found like the oldest house in a specific neighborhood, because it's going to find, what I did was find the minimum year built, right? And then the maximum of the example I showed you guys was to find the highest assessment value for each property type. And so in terms of like grouping logic, what I was doing, and this is on page 19, that first screenshot, you can see like the list of property types and then the max assessment. And so functionally what that's doing is returning a list of property types, and then among each of those groups, right, each group of property types, it's finding the maximum assessment value. So that's kind of another example of how that grouping logic works, or what I mean when I say grouping. You're grouping data together. So in that situation, the function that I'm performing is the maximum, and that function is going to be applied to each group of data that I'm returning. So that was the end of part 2. Today, part 3, like I said, I'm going to show you guys the sixth and final dynamic field, which is the sum of field. So I'm going to go ahead and get into Inquire. And I'm going to go ahead and load, I had my pre-built query, my sum query. So what I'm doing with the sum field, let me see, I think I had somebody, the first time I did this, I had somebody ask about wanting to know total assessments for each property type, okay? So we want to find, what are all the property types that exist in the county, and what is the total assessment in each property type? Because that's what this sum of field is going to do. It's going to sum whichever field you ask it to, right? And I'm on the bottom of page 19 is where I'm starting here. So, like with the other dynamic fields, the first thing you want to do is set up your query to return the results that you want to analyze. So what I've done is, to set up my query, what I really want is a list of property types to begin with, and I know I'm going to want their assessments, which is going to be on the assessment table, both of those pieces of data, property type and assessment. So this is a query for the moment that I can do with just one table. So I load up the assessment table, and I've defined my basic query. The jurisdiction I'm looking in, the tax year I'm looking in. I only want to look at real property parcels where cur equals y. I only want to look at val class is null, right, which I was talking about a minute ago. And all I've got selected to show in my results is LUC, which is property type. LUC stands for land use code in impact jargon. But the way this query is set up is, basically I'm telling Inquire I want to see a list of property types that meet these conditions. And this goes back to, like I was saying, you can select data without conditioning by it, and you can condition data without selecting it, right? So that allows you to manipulate which fields are shown in your results, and therefore which groups of data the function you're performing is applied to, is grouped by. So I've got my basic query here, list of property types that meet these criteria, and this will give me probably 0 through 12, I think. Residential, all of the exempt property types, commercial and industrial, farm, greenbelt, forest. So all this is telling me, like, this isn't really telling me anything useful, right? All this means is that at least one of each of these property types exists in Chester County in 2017, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not telling me how many there are. or any other, anything else about them. But now that I've got that defined, I can add my dynamic field, because what I'm trying to get to is the total assessment of each property type. So I want to use my sum function for that one. So I'm going to come up here to my query definition and click on my dynamic field. And field name, over on page 20, I'm going to call this, I call this sum assessment. So sum assessment. Field type, I want to use the sum of field. And again, it gave me the source field and the decimal places. And like I mentioned in some of the other dynamic fields, this source field dropdown is only going to provide you with options with fields that exist on the table that you're adding your dynamic field to. So since I'm working with the assessment table, and that's the field that I'm adding my dynamic field to, I'm only going to have fields from the assessment table listed here. And since I'm looking for assessment, what their assessed value is, I know that that field is called valasm1 for real property. I think for personal property, it would be, you would want to use valasm2 or 3, because I think for personal property, valasm1 is the non-equalized assessment, and then valasm2 and 3 are the equalized assessment. Or 2 is the equalized assessment, and then 3 is the final one, so they would match each other. But for real property, valasm1 is the field you want to use. Valasm1 is what their tax bill will actually be figured on. So from a pragmatic standpoint, that's what we're trying to analyze here, right? And then decimal places, for this kind of function, I shouldn't have any decimal places. So I can leave it not specified, or I can say 0, either way. And then click OK. And there's my dynamic field at the bottom of the table that I added it to, right? So now when I run this query, I should get 13 records, 13 result records like I did before. I'll get this same list of property types, and I'll get some of that assessment field, that valasm1 field, for each group, for each property type. So if I execute that, there's my, now I can tell that for residential properties, my total assessment in the county is $123,922,675, etc., right? And just like I did with one of the others, I can't remember which one, but there was one of the others that we were running this for something like this where we were getting exempt property types back. Well, they've got 0 assessment, right? So if I didn't want to see those, they don't weigh in my analysis because they're not assessed at anything, which they shouldn't be. So if I didn't want to see those, I can condition my dynamic field itself. I can say bring me the sum of assessment where that sum does not equal 0, and that'll cut out those 7 exempt property types. So now I'm only left with the 6 categories that actually have some assessment value. So ideally, with this information, I should be able to go run an assessment summary for this tax year, and they should pretty well match these numbers. So this would give you kind of an overall, for the county, for each property type, this is my assessment. And I'll show you guys again that thing that Lou pointed out to me. For the LUC field, if you wanted to, I'm going to talk through this. If you click on the Configure Output Fields button, this third button right here, where that assessment.luc, if you click that code description field, or checkbox, and hit save, and then run your query again, it'll put those labels there for some fields. Some fields have that, some don't. If you're ever curious, you can go check that Configure Output Fields window and see if it's there. But that's a handy thing to have in case, property types, most of us should pretty much know what all the property types are, but for some of the more esoteric stuff like reason codes, it's good to have this code description option to give you the labels there. But anyway, running this query like this, it gives you, like I've said, it gives you that list of property types and each category, each group's total assessment. So I showed this to somebody the first time I did this whole class, and they said, well, what if you wanted to break this down by city code as well? If you wanted to see how much assessment in each category belonged to each city code. So all you'd need to do is add city code to your list of output results, right? So thinking through that, city code doesn't live on the assessment table. It doesn't exist there. So we're going to have to add another table to our query, right? City code, again, I know from experience, city code is on the legal tab. It's on the legdat table. If you didn't know where it was, the easiest way to find it would be to just go find a parcel, any parcel in your county, and pull it up in maintain in multi-use transaction or assessment admin or whatever you want to use, and walk through it tab by tab until you find the city number. And that way, that'll show you where that city number is stored. But I know that it's on legdat, the legal tab, the legdat table. So I'm going to go up here and find my legal table, my legdat table. There it is, and I'm going to add it to my query. And then on legdat, I'm gonna condition cur equals y because I don't want to pull results for anything with a deactivated legal tab. And then I'm going to add my city number to my query results, which is what we call the school dist field, SCH dist. Which, again, don't ask me why that's where we put the city number. It just is. So I'm going to check that box to add school dist to my search results. So that's all I've done on this table. I've added legdat and selected cur equals y, or I conditioned cur to equal y, and then I selected school dist to show in my results. See, there's that error I was getting last time. It doesn't seem to hurt anything. So notice I haven't changed anything on my assessment table. It's set up exactly the same way it was, right? All I did was add school dist to my search results. That's the only functional change that I've made. So when I run this query, what I'll get now, instead of just a list of property types and their total assessments, will be a list of city codes and each property type that exists in each city code and the sum of their assessments. So that's kind of garbled, so I'm gonna adjust it so that it's easier to read. So let me sort this. I want to see my city number first on the leftmost, and then I want to see property type and then assessment. And I'm going to sort by these two fields. And I'm going to save that, and I'm going to click execute again. It's going to bring me the same results, just sorted and configured as I asked it to, right? Well, maybe not. What did I do wrong? Oh, this is the sort order. So if I want to see, if I go to configure output fields, I can dictate, I want to see school dist first, and then property type, and then sum of assessment. And there's that error again. Let's see if it matters. Nope. Now it's configured the way I wanted it to, right? I'm seeing my city codes, and then the property type in each city code, and then the sum of assessment for each property type in each city code, right? So I'm getting, oh, here's another trick. I don't remember what 242 and 326 are, so I'm going to add that code description too. And kind of an aside, this is something I try to tell folks. You can tell how much I'm kind of tweaking and calibrating this query. You'll very rarely ever set up a query, especially a moderately complicated query, and run it and get exactly what you want the first time. It's always better to start with something simple and then tweak it a little bit and then add something to it and then arrange it a little bit and work towards the results that you want to see. So anyway, I want to add my code description to school dist so I can see what my city names are. So that's my city number field, right? Okay. So now it should give me, yeah. So now 242 is Inville and 326 is Henderson. So now I can see that in the city of Inville, there are some residential properties, there are some commercial properties, and there are some ag, some greenbelt properties. So Inville doesn't have any industrial property types or any tins, any farms, or any forest property types, is what this is telling me. And then within each of those categories, all of Inville's residential properties are assessed for $608,600. All their commercial properties are assessed for $160,320. And then so on, the same breakdown for Henderson. Henderson has some residential, some commercial and industrial, some farm, ag, and forest, right? There's probably some exempt stuff in each of these cities, some exempt property types. But remember, we set our sum of assessment dynamic field to exclude anything where the sum of assessment is 0. So it's not going to, the exempt property types are not going to be represented there because their total assessment is $0. And then anything without a school dist, a city number, is going to be anything in the county, anything that's not in a city, which is where the bulk of our residential properties and the bulk of our ag properties, right? That makes sense. So something to note about this, hang on, I've lost my place in the book. That original query I ran, that just showed property types and their total assessments, right? That screenshot is on the top of page 21. If you look at that screenshot, like where the LUC 00 residential property types are assessed at 123, 922, 450. I want to make sure that that's what I was getting. Make sure the data hasn't changed since I took these screenshots. So I'm going to remove school dist. That's all I'm going to do to go back to that original query. Of course, I'm still excluding the exempt stuff. So my data has changed a little bit since I took those screenshots. So what I'm getting now is 123, 863, 425, as opposed to the 123, 922, 450, right? But the concept holds. If my total residential assessment is this number, just looking at property types, when I add the city number or school dist to my search results, and see, it's messed up my configuration again. But when I add that and break down this grouping even further, if you go through and add up these residential numbers, these total residential assessments for each subcategory, it will give you that total assessment number that you were getting for residential. So the total sums here aren't changing at all. They're just being broken down by different categories. They're being grouped together by different pieces of data. So, okay. That is how the sum field operates, and you could use it. The other thing I could think of off the top of my head it might be useful would be if for some reason you wanted to see what like the sum of sale prices for a particular quarter would be. That might help you get like an overall weighted mean kind of ratio. If you wanted to see total sales per neighborhood or something like that, you could select the neighborhood field and then define your sum field to do sum of the sale price field, and that would give you total sale price per neighborhood in, whatever quarter for warranty deeds, for accepted sale. You could condition your query further beyond that. So that's what the sum field. I think what I've shown you guys today is going to be the most useful thing. So if you have like a budget meeting or something, and you need to quickly show what your total assessment numbers look like, this would be a useful field. Again, especially in that context, you definitely want to include this val class is null, because if you don't, I'll show you what'll happen. I'm gonna remove the leg debt table altogether. I just want to see total assessment of property types. So there's how much each of my property types in my county is totally assessed for, with val class is null selected or conditioned. If I had not conditioned val class as null, if I forgot to include that condition in my query, if I exclude that, before I run this query, I'm getting about $124 million for a residential assessment. If I run it without val class, suddenly I'm up close to $250 million. So my numbers basically doubled, and it will have for every category. So that's why I emphasize, I beat that dead horse. You always want to put val class as null when you're querying the assessment table, because otherwise you will get inaccurate numbers, and yeah, you just want to make sure you always put val class as null there. So, okay, that was the last of the dynamic fields. So what I'm going to spend the rest of this morning talking about is this group of tables that we've created called additional TN tables, additional Tennessee tables. So up until this point, everything that I've shown you guys, and most of the queries that most people do anyway, I think, are going to be on what we call the core tables. Anytime you're looking at PARDAT or OWNDAT or a LEGDAT or land or DWELLDAT or COMDAT or assessment, any of the parcel data tables, those are core tables. And what I mean by that is that they're tables that were part of the impact system when we acquired it. And they're part of the fundamental structure of how parcel data is stored. We got to a point about a year ago, I think, a little over a year ago maybe, where we realized that we had the ability in-house to develop our own tables for different things that are searchable within Inquire. And I'm at the bottom of page 22 and on to page 23 in the manual. So I'm going to show you guys how to use some of these tables that we've written to meet some of the needs that you guys have expressed. And that's where all of these additional TN tables have come from, are suggestions from county assessors and county assessor employees. This is also the reason I tell you guys to go to the business areas category, because I did have a question from Jenny Martin in Dixon County. After part 2, she got in touch with me to ask why do we need to go to business areas instead of transactions? Because all these core tables are available in the transactions menu. It's set up a little differently. You know, you click on CAMA to expand that. It looks like the maintain transaction menu over here. So the way this menu is structured, you've got your assessment admin stuff, and then your CAMA stuff, and then your ag use stuff, etc. When you first go into Inquire, if you're in the dataset category transactions, that's obviously, it mirrors those maintain transactions. So it's set up the same way. So you can go to CAMA and select multi-use, and then see the tabs that exist only in the multi-use transaction, or only the tabs that are in the multi-use transaction. So you can get to all of the same core tables here as you can from here. So when you're loading a query, or when you're building a query on those core tables, it doesn't really make any difference. You can load them from business areas, or you can load them from transactions. Either way will be fine. The reason that business areas is important is because it's the only dataset category from which you can access these additional Tennessee tables. If you notice in the transactions menu, they're not there. That category is not there. So if I go over to business areas and click on additional Tennessee tables, additional TN tables, I get this long list of tables, and some of these are used, some of the tables in here are going to be used by our technology department. I think Office of State Assessed Properties has some tables in there. So since we've discovered that this is a thing that we can do, we've kind of taken the idea and run with it. So there are a lot of tables in this category, but I'm going to show you guys, I think I've got 5 listed in here. Yeah, I'm going to show you guys the 5 really, I think most relevant ones to what you guys do. So the first one I want to show you guys on page 24 is called the TNV invalid parcel IDs table, is what it's called, and it's right there. Most of the ones that we use are going to start with that TNV letters, and what that stands for is Tennessee View, which is a technical database description for how these tables are built. So this is the view that we use to identify invalid parcel IDs. If any of you use that dashboard gadget that shows you invalid parcel IDs, this is where that data comes from. So I know, or I think only certain roles have access to that gadget, but everybody has access to this Inquire table. As long as you have access to Inquire, you should be able to access this table. So what you can do is load this table, TNV invalid parcel IDs, and then when you click on it down here to load your table, load your fields, you'll notice there are only 3 fields on this table. So what you can do is select everything and then define your conditions. Like I only want to look in jurisdiction 12, and I want to look in the current tax year. And I'm going to leave parcel ID blank. So what's going to be stored on this table is any invalid parcel IDs that currently exist in Chester County in 2017. So this table will hold invalid parcel IDs in every county, but you'll only have access to the ones that exist in your county for you county users. DPA users, you guys should be able to access every county. So running it like this, I'm going to get back any invalid parcel IDs that exist. And I had gone in and made some beforehand so that I knew I would have some results here. And this mirrors the screenshot on the bottom of page 24, you can see. So one of I think the great thing about having this table here is you may be wondering, okay, we've got this gadget to show us these invalid parcel IDs. So why do we need this capability? Why do we need to go through the trouble of coming into Inquire and loading this table up and running this query? The big thing that I think this will help with is I've had a lot of questions from people saying that, this gadget is telling me I have an invalid parcel ID, and I've gone into PRM module and I've gone into maintain search, and the parcel ID is just so weird that I can't figure out how to key it in to get that parcel to return to me so that I can deactivate it. So what you can do instead of going through all that, the hassle of trying to search for the specific parcel ID itself, if it's something weird like with a decimal in the middle or a slash, or if you had something with spaces that may not be represented, what you can do is come to this Inquire table and query your jurisdiction, and it should return the list of invalid parcel IDs that are in your dashboard gadget. Then from here, you can click on this Edit and Maintain button. For each of them, you can open this parcel directly into Maintain. And that saves you the trouble of having to go out and endlessly search for a wonky parcel ID. So now it opened this straight into Maintain. And let me change my role real quick. County Assessor. I'm going to refresh this page. So now I've got this parcel open. I can take it into activate, deactivate, and deactivate this parcel on the spot. Saves me the trouble of having to try to find that specific parcel ID because it's stored on this Inquire table. Excuse me. So this was, I think this was kind of the one of the original tables or views that we built for you guys. Was kind of, we discovered this as we were first working with gadgets and building gadgets. So the next table, the next Tennessee table I want to show you guys is, it's called the pared element table, the T&V pared element. I'm gonna remove this from my query definition and go back to data sets. And I'm gonna find, there it is, T&V pared element. So what this table does is it breaks out all the parcel IDs into constituent pieces. So now we've had trouble in the past with the fact that the way parcel IDs are stored in Impact are in a single field. It's one 16-digit string of letters and numbers. And so if you're trying to find like mineral parcels, for example, or trailer cards or something like that, or everything on map A and group C, it can be hard to condition out those specific pieces, the property identifier or the group letter. It can be hard to specifically query those individual constituent pieces of the parcel ID. I know a lot of you guys have used the UID fields. I think they're on the PARDAT table. I haven't used them in a long time, so I can't remember where they are. But I would recommend against using those because they're not absolutely reliable. We're not sure how those fields are populated. Some of them are populated with the correct values. Some of them are just empty. So if you go looking for, like I said, if you wanted to find all mineral parcels and you said bring me everything where property identifier equals M, it's possible that there are mineral parcels out there where that UID field, whatever that would be, UID 4 I think, is not correctly populated. It would be null. And so you might miss that parcel using that UID field. So the solution to that was for us to build this T&V pared element table. And what it does, I'm going to select everything again, and I'm going to define my tax year and my jurisdiction. What it does is, at any given moment, whenever you run this query, jur is invalid. Oh, that's why. Yeah. I'm used to it being the other way around. I guess tax year 12 is okay. So I want to look in Chester County in 2017. I only want to see cur equals y. I think the example in the book, I left that unmarked, so I'm going to leave that. There shouldn't be any deactivated on this table, I wouldn't think. But anyway, what this does, if I go ahead and run this just for the whole county, for every parcel that exists out there, in this instance, in Chester County in 2017, every parcel that exists, it's going to give me what the total parcel ID is, that 16-digit string, and then it's going to break it out into the 5 pieces, I think, that we're all more familiar with, especially folks who had been on CAS. You get the control map, the parcel ID, the actual parcel number, the group number, the property identifier, and the special interest. Of course, these are out of order here, so I can go ahead, I can do the output configuration like I was doing earlier, right? So if I want to see jurisdiction and then tax year and then the full parcel ID, and then I can define, okay, now I want to see control map and group and parcel and property identifier and special interest. That's the order it should be in, right? And then cur, I guess I'll put 9. So if I save that and run this again, now it'll give me those fields in that familiar order. So here's the parcel ID, 33MK1303000, right? And it breaks out control map 33M, parad group K, parcel 1303. Property identifier is not null here, it's a space. Just like any of these where there's no parad group, these aren't nulls, they're spaces. So it may look like there's nothing there, but there actually is a character in these fields that just doesn't have a visual representation. So that's something to be aware of, maybe, if you ever use this table, is that these are not nulls, they're spaces, the distinction there. But it gives you the individual pieces of each parcel ID. So what this would be handy for is, like I was saying earlier, if you needed to identify mineral parcels. See, it's given me, should be all of the parcels in the county. So if I wanted to identify mineral parcels, I can't remember if there are any in Chester County, but you would come in here and define your county and your tax year, and then in the property identifier field, you'd say equals M. So I've got 1. So that way I can use that specific position because it's been broken out over here to query by. The example I give in the book, so if you wanted to find, what I'm doing in the books is, or the first example would be if you wanted to find everything on a specific control map, right? So in the book I did like 33B. So what you would want to do there is, I'm going to take this back out. If I wanted to find everything on control map 33B, it would look like this. I couldn't do control map equals 033B. And the reason for that, the reason I'm not getting anything back there, is because technically the control map field is 5 digits. Because there are still some 50-foot maps out there. There are still some maps that have 2 letters there. So we had to make it a 5-digit space. So if you wanted to find everything on map 33B, you could do 033B wildcard. If you're using a wildcard, you have to do like. So control map like 33B%. And this is that screenshot that I've got on page 25. You can reference back to that if you ever need to. This way, I'll pull anything that starts with the digits 033B. And that'll give me my 19 parcels on that control map. I might be able to, let me try this. Put a space there with an equal sign. Nope, that does not work. So what you want to do, if you're looking for a control map, is do like, and then whatever your control map number and letter are, and then a wildcard. So that one's pretty straightforward, I think. All this table's doing is taking the parcel ID that exists there and breaking it out into its pieces. And it should, at any given time you run this, anytime you query this table, it should give you results to match parcels that actually exist in your county. So if I were to go deactivate one of these parcels, like 33BA22, and then come back and run this query again, I should then only get 18 results, because that parcel is no longer there, right? Okay. The next table I'm going to show you guys is actually the first of these Tennessee tables that we built. Or among the first 2. I'm going to show you 2 of the same thing. So I'm going to clear out my query definition. And I'm going to load the real property assessment summary detail table. We kept having questions from people. Here it is, assessment summary RP debt is real property detail is what RP debt stands for. We kept having questions from people like, I need to run an assessment summary for how my data looked on June 1st of last year, which is not possible. The way that assessment summary program, the actual AA501TN program works, is it goes out and looks at the data that's out there right now and assembles all of that data together, all of the counts and property types and assessments and appraisals and all the stuff that's on there. It just goes and gets whatever's there right now. So there's no real way to run an assessment summary for a prior date or a prior data state, right? It can only reflect the current state of the data. So we kept getting these questions. Well, I need to know what my assessment summary looked like 6 months ago or a year and a half ago. And we realized that we may not be able to do that exact thing, but we can do something that's close enough that it will meet those needs. So what we did is we made this table, and the next one I'll talk about in a minute. We made this table the assessment summary RP debt. Assessment summary real property detail table. And what this does, if you look at page 26, I've included a little screenshot of the detail summary portion of the assessment summary that gives you a breakdown of property types and their assessments and their parcel counts. So that's basically what this data that's stored on this table is going to reflect, is that real property detail breakdown. So what we did is we built this table, and then we set up a recurring process that runs, I think, at 1 o'clock every morning. And it goes and grabs this data and stores it in this table at 1 o'clock every morning. And I think it started, hang on, I did not include it in the text. We started storing this data on April 6th of last year. So that's when we did the first of these additional Tennessee tables. So any of your data going back to April 6th of 2016, you can come in here and get that real property assessment summary detail data for. Now, I think it's the way it's set up, it only stores data for whatever the current tax year is. So if you were in tax year 2016 and had some stuff out in the future, it's not going to catch the future parcels. It's only catching the current parcels. But what I can do here, let me see, the example I have in the book is, I'm going to select all this stuff, and I want to see the current tax year, right? And for jurisdiction 12 is what I'm in. And then my summary date, I want to see January 9th. So I want to see what my assessment summary would have looked like for Chester County in 2017 on January 9th of 2017. So I'm going to go in here and pick that date, January 9. So when I run this, I'll get that same breakdown, right? So this, you can see how this kind of mirrors the structure of that assessment summary, that section of the assessment summary. And I could even say, just like I was doing with the exempt parcels earlier, I don't want to see the zeros because they don't weigh. They don't weigh anything in my analysis. So I'm gonna tell it assessment count. I don't want to see anything where my count equals 0. I don't want to see a record category returned where there's nothing in that category. So I'm going to set assessment count equal to 0 and run this again, and it should trim out these 4 records and leave me these bottom 6. So now, oh, I set equal to 0. Whoops. So let's say assessment count does not equal 0. So now it's giving me the 6 records, or the 6 categories that I actually have parcels in, and how many of each parcel, and what the total assessment of each parcel was as of January 9th, 2017. So first and foremost, this gives you a way to look back. This gives you a way to go back and say, what did my assessment summary detail look like on a specific date? The other thing that this is useful for, and I've had to do this a couple of times. I've had people call in and say, oh, this also drives a gadget. I forgot to mention that. This drives one of those summary detail gadgets and another gadget that offers warnings. I don't know how much attention you guys pay to it, but it'll say if your industrial assessment jumped by 20% from yesterday to today, it gives you that warning, right? On that assessment summary gadget or whatever it's called, it'll say, your industrial assessment jumped by 20%. It doesn't give you any more information than that, but it's a way to let you know, like, hey, something might be hinky here. You might want to do some digging and take a look. This is the table that drives that calculation. So every night, our process runs to store these numbers on this table, and then that gadget is designed to compare yesterday's numbers to today's, and anything that exceeds an increase or decrease of a certain threshold, I can't remember what that threshold is, and it might be different for each category. Like a 10% increase in residential is going to be a lot less common than a 10% increase in industrial, right? Because if you're, especially in smaller counties, if you have somebody build a new big industrial complex, that could constitute a large percentage of your industrial assessment. Whereas your residential assessment, like in Chester County on January 9th, had, 123 million, almost $124 million of assessment. A 10% jump there is going to be huge, but a 10% jump here might not be as eyebrow raising. So whatever that threshold is for each individual category, if that threshold is met or exceeded, that gadget will generate a warning. Hey, your industrial jumped by 15% or whatever. So that's the other situation in which this table can come in handy. So I've had people call and say, hey, I've got this message that the one I've gotten most often, I think, is my residential personal property accounts, which I'll show you guys the personal property side of this table in a minute. My residential personal property accounts dropped by 100%. And usually what it is, if you think about it, you shouldn't have any residential personal property accounts. Usually what it is they might have had one that they didn't know about or was out there on accident for whatever reason. They realized it was there and they went in and changed it to commercial. So then when this process runs, well, yesterday there was one residential personal property account. Today there's 0. So that's a 100% decrease, right? So that's a pretty common one we get. Otherwise, with real property, we'll get that question a lot. I've got this warning saying my residential stuff increased by whatever percentage, and I didn't think anything was supposed to have been keyed, or I need to know what has caused that change. So what you can do with this table, in addition to pulling detail data for a specific date, you can pull data for an individual category over a range of days. So you can kind of track, it'll help you narrow down when those changes might have taken place. So if you look at the second screenshot I've got on page 27 in the manual, you can see how a query like that might be set up. So I'm going to alter this a little bit. I'm going to take this out. And category is going to be, obviously which category I'm looking at. So I'm going to set my category if there was some crazy change in residential assessment and I needed to find out when that change took place. So I only want to see my residential category. So I'm going to put in here residential, whatever it says here. And you could even, if you're not sure, you could even select this and copy it and paste it in here if you wanted to be extra sure that you're actually putting this in correctly. So you could say, you know, I only want to see residential numbers, but I want to set a range of dates. So I want to say summary date between, for the example I've got in the book, I did January 8th and January 10th. So if you knew something had happened within those few days and you wanted to track that change, I think I've mentioned before, anytime you use between, it is inclusive, which means that technically the number between 8 and 10 is 9, but if you say dates between January 8th and January 10th, the results you'll get back will be January 8th, January 9th, and January 10th. It includes the parameters on either end of your between. So running this, I should get 3 records back. I should get the residential category for those 3 dates. So then I can look down through here and say, oh, okay, between the 8th and the 9th, my count didn't change, but my assessment went up. And then from the 9th to the 10th, I gained 2 residential parcels, which caused my assessment to go up some more. So this way you can track from one day to the next or across a number of days changes in a specific category. Or if you did want to track the entire thing, you could say, the way I would do that, something like this, if you only wanted to look at one category for a few days, this would probably be the easiest way to do it. But if you wanted to see like how all the categories changed over the course of a week, you could set that up. Like, I don't want to condition my category, and I'm gonna change this to whatever, the 15th. I might be straddling a weekend there. So if I run this, I'm gonna get, and I want to exclude my zeros. So I only want to see categories that have data. So this is going to give me all the categories for all of these dates, which, if you're trying to analyze these numbers, it's kind of untenable here. It's kind of hard to look at each of these, you know, inside this query results window. So if I wanted to analyze these across dates, let's see, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15. So it looks like there was a weekend in here. So that the 15th is probably a Monday. So if I wanted to analyze all of these fields across, or all of these categories across these dates, what I would want to do is take these results and export them to Excel. So I want to download this into Excel and click OK. I want to open that. So then from here, in Excel, it's a lot easier to arrange and manipulate the data you want to analyze. So with this spreadsheet, first of all, I can get rid of these first 3 columns, because the first column is just a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that just numbers your results. And then tax year and jurisdiction, well, I know which tax year and jurisdiction I'm working in, so I don't need those. So I'm going to get rid of these. Delete. So now what I've got is my raw basic data, my summary date, my category, my count, and my total assessment for that category. So I want to sort this into a format that is meaningful to me. So I'm going to select everything, and I want to sort it by 2 columns, really, is what I want to do. So I want to go to Data and Sort. I want to add a level, and I want to sort by summary date first, because I want to see all of my categories grouped together by date, and then within each date, I want to sort by category. So if I set it up like that and click OK, it's going to resort all my data so that here's all my January 8th stuff at the top, and then my January 9th stuff, and then my January 10th, etc. And then within each date, my categories are arranged alphabetically. Agricultural, commercial, farm, forest, and then on the 9th, agricultural, commercial, farm, forest. So now what I can do is I can put this data side by side. I'm going to leave the 8th where it is, but I'm going to pull the 9th out. I'm going to highlight the 9th. I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to paste it over here. I'm going to Control V will paste without having to deal with all of these Excel paste options. Control C copies and Control V pastes for reference. Sometimes, this is kind of, or this is really off topic, if you ever have a really big number, a number that's bigger than the cell it's in Excel, it may show in scientific notation is what this is called, 1.24 e times. All that means is the number is longer than the cell is. You just need to widen your cell out a little bit. So here's my January 9th data. I'm going to take my January 10th data, and I could either right click and say copy, or since I have it highlighted, I can hold Control and hit C, as it puts that copy border around it. And then, actually, I don't want to do Control C, I want to cut it. I'm going to do Control X to cut it. And then I'm going to come up here and do Control V to paste it. This is what happens if your date is bigger than the cell you're in. So anytime you see something like that, if you're getting a bunch of pound signs or scientific notation, you can either just widen your field a little bit, or if it's shorter like that, if you double click right here, it'll automatically fit to the biggest value in that field. So like this one was giving me scientific notation there. Some of them are showing up, but if I wanted to auto fit this column to that value, I could just double click there and it'll open up enough to show me that whole value. So then I can continue putting all my numbers side by side like this, right? I'm going to get the 12th, and I'm going to go over here, I'm going to paste that. This has kind of become a little Excel tutorial, right? I'm going to get those and put them over here. So now I've got multiple columns where I've got values that don't fit. So instead of going column by column and double clicking everything, what you can do is, if you click on the top left corner here, above the 1 and to the left of the A, if you click there, it selects the whole spreadsheet, and then you can pick any column and double click it, and it will auto fit every column to whatever data is in it. Notice some of them got a little narrower to fit these counts, right? And some of them widened up to fit the dates and the values. And then you could, if you were wanting to keep this, or maybe to keep it straight, you could copy your column headers and stick them throughout here, right? And then, you know, some of my columns need to be auto-fitted again, so I'm going to do this again. So anyway, this is just nitpicky formatting stuff. The point is, you can use that assessment summary RPDET table to generate these assessment summary values for a range of days, and then kick those values out into Excel. And in Excel, you can manipulate and arrange your data to make it more analysis friendly. So now that I've got it like this, I can say, okay, I want to see what changes occurred in my residential category across these days. So maybe like under here, I would say, I want to see what this assessment minus that assessment is. And then I could copy that formula across. Oops, copy, paste. So from this day to that day, my assessment increased $3,550. From the 9th to the 10th, it increased $20,750. You could do that with the counts. You could do it with any other category. So this way you can look at all of your substantial assessment summary categories across a range of dates. You could do whatever analysis you wanted to here in Excel. And it makes it easier to flow from one day to the next. And that way you can narrow down to bring it back to what led me off on this little tangent in the first place, was if you had some unexpected change, you log in one day and you have a warning. Your residential assessment summary increased by 45% from yesterday or from last week or whatever. then you can go in here and use this kind of analysis to track those changes from day to day. I'm gonna go ahead and close this. So this assessment summary real property detail, the assessment summary RP debt table, is very handy, I think, for being able to track those kinds of things. So the other side of this coin, number 4 I want to show you guys, is the personal property counterpart to this. We did the same thing for personal property. Oh, one more thing I was going to mention about the dates, the way these summary dates are stored. Because they're set to run overnight, the dates are a little weird. So you may have to play with the dates a little bit to get them to match up. So for instance, the data that's stored, I think what we do is we run it, I don't think it's 1 in the morning, I think it's in the evening sometime, like 9 or 11 p.m. or something like that. And the first one for the week runs on Sunday night. So that Sunday night dump, basically, is how we think of it, is going to reflect the data the way it was at the end of the day Friday. Or if any of you key on a Saturday, I know sometimes that has been known to happen, that will be reflected in that Sunday night dump. So if you're looking for Friday night's data, you would want to put the following Sunday's date in there. And I apologize for that. It's kind of counterintuitive, but that's just the way it's set up for now. But it's something, you know, if you're paying attention to how these dates work, and you may go back and look at the 8th through the 15th. So, like, I'm pulling data for January 8th over here. January 8th is a Sunday. What that January 8th data actually is from the end of business on that Friday, the 6th. So I'm getting 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then 13 or 14 are skipped, and the 15th brings me that Friday's date. Again, I'm not sure why they set it up that way in the first place, but just be aware that there is some idiosyncrasy to how those dates are stored. Okay, I'm going to show you guys the personal property table, which is really set up the exact same way, almost. There's a small difference that I'll show you with the personal property. It is named similarly. So that was the assessment summary RP debt, real property detail table. This one is the assessment summary PP debt, PP detail, personal property detail. So if I load that up, and I'm on page 28 in the manual now. If I load this up, it will do the same thing that the real property summary did, but for personal property. So again, on page 28, I put a screenshot of that section of the personal property assessment summary that this table is intended to encapsulate, intended to capture. It'll show you those breakdowns of different property types, different categories, and the total assessment in each category. So, first off, if I just wanted to pull for a specific date, I could say, I need to define my tax year and my jurisdiction, and then my summary date. And the example I've got in the book is January 9th. So I'm going to say summary date equals January 9th. Which would be the state of data at the end of the day on January 9th, that evening. So if I run this, I didn't select any output fields. That might help. I want to see all of it. So if I run this, I should get all those categories for January 9th. Notice I've still got those zeros, right? The caveat, like I said, this works exactly the same as the real property detail table, except for one little thing, one little difference, is that this one has a sum category in it. So just like in the summary, you've got your industrial and commercial, and then your total, right? The way this table is set up, what it does is the tangible category on any given day is going to be the sum of the commercial and industrial categories, and residential and local utility and farms. Right? Most of the time, ideally, you shouldn't have any farm personal property accounts. You shouldn't have any residential personal property accounts. You might have some local utility. I don't think that's very common, but essentially, this tangible category is the sum of all the other records except for intangible. And again, just like the local utilities, I know intangible accounts are incredibly uncommon. I know Murray County has some. I think that's the only county I can think of off the top of my head that has any intangible accounts. But the intangible category stands alone here. So if you were to have any intangible accounts, whatever is in that category is what they're assessed at. And then tangible is going to be the sum of farm and commercial and industrial and residential and local utilities. And then total personal, like is reflected on the summary, would need to be tangible plus intangible. So if you'll notice on page 29, I've got screenshots of these same results that I'm showing right here. They're arranged a little differently. But I've got screenshot of these results and then an explanation of what I just fumbled my way through explaining was the fact that tangible is a summation category. And you can see like that example down below that at the bottom of page 29, I've shown where the total commercial assessment is 7,046,300, right? And the total industrial assessment is, what is that, $4,775,074. And then the total tangible is just the sum of those two numbers, that 11,821,374. And then the same for the account counts. There's 32 industrial accounts and 367 commercial accounts for a total of 399. So if you do use this assessment summary, personal property detail table, just keep in mind that like with results like this, there are not 780 some odd accounts here. There are 399. And that these are a breakdown of those 399 accounts. But then beyond that, this table can be used in exactly the same way as the assessment summary real property detail table. You can pull every category for a specific date, and I could do the same thing. I don't want to see any category that has 0. I don't want to see any categories that are not represented. So I can limit those out and just see the categories that weigh. So you can see all of your data as of a specific date, or you could run it for a specific category. So if I wanted to see commercial data for a range of dates, I want to say summary date between, I'll use the same thing I was using earlier, January 8th and January 10th. That'll show, I'm in date order. I'm only getting one category back, commercial, and I'm seeing the changes that happened in this category from the 8th to the 9th, from the 9th to the 10th. And I can see here at a glance, from the 8th to the 9th, nothing in my commercial personal property accounts changed. I didn't gain or lose any accounts, and my assessment didn't change. From the 9th to the 10th, I lost a few accounts, and my assessment dropped. And then just like I did with the real property table, again, you could pull all of your categories I'm going to put this back in. I don't want to see the 0 categories. I want to see all of my substantial categories across a range of dates. There's fewer categories than I got when I did this in residential or in real property. But you could do the same thing. If you had, what if you wanted to see a whole month's worth? You could say January 1st through January, oh Lord, January 31st. And now I've got 69, almost 70 records. So I could do the same thing. I could download this into Excel and then manipulate my data from there and run whatever analysis I needed to. Because while Inquire is great for designing a search and configuring your search results to a certain extent, at this point where you've got a relatively large number of search results that you need to kind of manipulate, that kind of work, that kind of analysis might be easier to do in Excel. So yeah, these two tables, the assessment summary, real property detail, and assessment summary, personal property detail tables, are incredibly useful, and they drive those. I think there's a gadget that gives you like a pie chart that shows what portion of your total assessment is residential and industrial and commercial, and this is what drives that. There's that one that gives you warnings about value changes. I think there might be one or two others. There are several things that this data is used for, on top of the benefit of just being useful for purely analytical purposes. You can come in here and pull data as of a specific date for this. So, okay, the last thing I'm going to show you guys, the last table I'm going to show you guys this morning is the TNV locked trans table. And it, I think also, yeah, I've got a screenshot of the gadget on page 30. We're on the last page of the manual. It drives that locked transactions gadget, which again, I think only certain roles have access to that gadget, but anybody who has access to Inquire can come in here and query that table. So if I go to, I've got additional TN tables loaded over here. If I go down and find, there's my TNV locked trans table. If I load this up and select everything, and I want to look at the current tax year in my county, what this will return me is basically what's represented in that gadget already. Uh-oh, because I don't have anything locked. So what that tells me is at the moment in Chester County, in tax year 2017, there aren't any locked parcels. But I can change that. I'll show you guys how this works practically. I want to go out here and find a Smith. There's always a Smith. Here's Ray. Ray owns a lot of property. So if I'm working on a parcel, and I've got this guy pulled up, and I've done whatever. I've keyed some stuff here and some stuff there, and some stuff over here. Whatever, it doesn't matter. If I've got this parcel locked, I locked this record on April 20th, 2017. If I've got this parcel locked, anybody who has access to Chester County data can run this query right here and see, oh, this parcel in Jur 12 in tax year 2017, I don't know why that says CAMA combined, but it was locked by IG 09310, that's me, on April 20th at 10:24 a.m. It's 10:24. So you guys in the county, in any county, you guys can go in and run this query, tax year 2017 or tax year whatever, for whatever jurisdiction you're in. So you can run this query and it'll return you a list of every parcel that's locked in your county right now. Who locked it and when. You DPA folks who are listening, y'all can run this for any county. So you can go out and see who's locked any parcel in any county, or who has a parcel currently locked. So this might be handy. I know for some of the processes that we run here in Nashville, we look at this sometimes for a lot of the reappraisal processes. If we're having to like run batch updates or batch recalculations on a county, those processes, when we run them, if there are any locked parcels, can sometimes cause what we call data conflicts. So we may use this to double check and make sure whether there are any currently locked parcels in a county. If you guys in the county, if you have an employee leave, maybe, or is on vacation for an extended period of time or whatever, you can check and see if they have anything locked under their IG number. I think the county assessor, like I said, this drives that gadget. So the assessor and maybe some other folks might have that gadget on their dashboard, but as I said, anybody who has access to Inquire can get in and query this table. So this is a handy way to check and see if there's anything locked in your county at the moment, or in any county for you DPA folks. So that is the end of the manual. That's the end of what I had to talk to you guys about.